In this section, I'll demonstrate the setting up of our iSCSI targets and creation of an NFS server. We'll do this in both OpenFiler and in Windows Server 2012. So, in a production environment, you would more than likely have a SAN with a built-in OS running or providing support for Fiber Channel or iSCSI in your environment. But in our case, I will build a SAN and our NAS in a virtual machine, and this would be just for testing purposes. All right, so we'll start off the demonstration with OpenFiler. So OpenFiler basically is a Linux-based operating system that allows you to create a block-based SAN storage and file-based NAS or NFS storage. Okay, so they are both the free and the paid-for version of it. But in our case, for testing purposes, we would download and configure the free version of OpenFiler. All right. So to start this off, let me pull my web browser up here, and we'll go ahead and download OpenFiler to start with, and then get into the installation and configuration of this. Okay, so it's openfiler.com. Okay, so at the home page here, we could go to OpenFiler download here. Then we would have the option of downloading the ISO image for this. It's just over 500 megs for this ISO image. So I'll just go ahead and hit download here. Alright. I already downloaded this ISO. It's just 507 megs. So I downloaded this and store it to one of my drive here. So we'll go ahead and work with that. Once this is downloaded, we'll create a virtual machine where we would utilize that ISO image. So let me pull up my VMware workstation here, and we'll go ahead and create a new virtual machine. So this would serve as our OpenFiler box. So new virtual machine. I'll select custom here. Leave the default there. I'll choose the image. I have this over on my E drive. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit next here. For operating system type, I'll choose Otter, and under Otter it's a 64-bit OS, so I'll choose Otter 64-bit. Next, I'll give this a name, so let's just call this OpenFiler. Where I would like to store this, let me go for it to my E drive here. Under virtual machine, let me just make a new folder really fast for this. Okay, I'll leave the default for the processor with 1 core here. Before we continue here, let me just go back a second, show you guys the requirements for OpenFiler. So back at the home page here, the requirements should be under products, system requirements. Okay, so this is the recommended hardware specs you should have to run this. 64-bit processor, 2 gigs or higher RAM. Okay, 8 gigs of storage space is recommended. Alright, so let's get back to our installation. Alright, so I'll leave this at the default here. I'll give it 2 gigs of memory. Actually, this would work with a lot less memory. I did test this with even 512 megs of memory would run this pretty good. So let's just add 2 gigs for this. I'll leave my default network type, leave my default controller type, leave this at the default. So we'll go ahead and create a new disk here. So the recommendation basically for this is you just create one disk or one partition that you need for the open file or operating system, and we would come in back later and add our additional disks that we need for storage of our data. So I'll just go ahead and give this a 16 gigs VMDK for now, but we'll come back in here and add additional disks for NFS and our iSCSI storage. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this here to split it into multiple files. I'll store this with the VM and just hit on finish here. Alright, so once this is completed, I could go ahead and start this guest up. Okay, so to start the GUI installation, I will go ahead and hit enter. The installation is quite simple and it just takes a couple minutes. So we'll just run through this really fast. Okay, so this is a start screen for the installer. Next, I'll choose my default keyboard layout of US English here. So we're having a warning here that is going to go ahead and erase data on this drive. So that's okay because we don't have any data on that 16 gig drive. So I'll just go ahead and select next. I'll let it do the partition layout for me, so I'll just hit next and just confirm that I want to do this. Here we could manually specify the IP address by selecting edit here. So ideally you would want to have a static IP address for this storage device, since this shouldn't change. And then we will set up our host name here. The recommendation too is you would want to set up this in your DNS server, a record for this. But for now I'll just use my default and just select next. I'll leave the default time zone there. And then I'll add a root password and confirm it. This password is not for the GUI that we'll be using to manage this device. This is basically if we'll log in at the console. This is the password for the root account at the console. Alright, so I'll go ahead and select next here, and then next. This will just take a few, about a minute. Once this is finished, it'll prompt to reboot, and once it comes up, we should see our interface there with the login, the IP address to log this in. So we'll go on our browser after that and just point it to that IP address. Okay, so let's just wait on this to complete, and then we'll get to that point. Okay, this should prompt us to restart at any point now. Okay, so let's just go ahead and reboot this, and once this comes up, we log into it. It would automatically boot here if you don't select it. Okay, so for the web administration GUI, this is the address we'll point to connect to this device. So let me just pull up my browser and we'll go here. It's at the 182 address, and then we'll enter port 446 at the end. So let me just open new tab here. This should just take a few seconds and then log in. So actually, this has been cached in my browser. Let me just log out here. I had a device running previously here, so let me just log this out and I'll log in back to it. Okay. So once we point to this IP address, this is what we should see here. All right, the first time we are logging in. By default, the default username is OpenFiler. Okay, and the default password is password. So OpenFiler and password all lowercase. And then once you log in for the first time, we should be at the status tab here. Just gives us some basic information about this box. All right. How our 16 gigs was used up here. All right. So it would have went ahead and created 3 partitions on that 16 gigs VMDK. Okay. So the first thing we'll want to do is at least have our time sorted or configure our time. So if you come under system and then go to clock setup here, all right, it has a couple of suggestions here for our time source. We could use one of this, for example. Okay, and set up your synchronization there. We could make some changes if we need to here. So once we have our time configured, we'll go under services. Okay, and these are all the different services that we could run on OpenFiler. All right, there's iSCSI initiator, iSCSI target. So in our case, we want this to function as an iSCSI target. So we'll go ahead and enable our iSCSI target here. So once we enable our iSCSI target service, we'll need to start that. And this would stick to once we restart this box. So the service would come up here. We'll also need to configure this as a NFS server. So I'll go ahead and enable that too. And just start the NFS server service too. Okay. So that's all we will be configuring, the NFS and iSCSI. So once we have those two configured, what we would want to do now is have our disk added in here. So what I'll do is add one VMDK for NFS, and then I'll add a second one for our iSCSI target. All right. So I'll just power off this VM for now. Okay, and add those 2 additional disks, and then we'll come back in here and then work with our volumes and set this up. All right, so to do that, we'll come over to the right here on top, shutdown. So I want to shut down and halt this. So go ahead and hit shutdown here. Once this is powered off, I'll go back to my VMware workstation that I'm labbing all of this on. And I'll create my virtual this. So this is still running here. I'll just give it a couple sec more. Okay, so I'll go in and edit this virtual machine settings. So I need to add 2 additional drive here. So add, first I'll go ahead and add, let's just add a 120 gig partition drive for the iSCSI target. And let me go ahead and add a second one. And this one should be for our NFS share. I'll give this one 80 gigs. It's a default there. Finish that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and power this up back now. Just hit on enter here. Okay, so once this comes up, I'll just go back to my web interface. If you did configure your DNS for this, you'll just enter your host name here and you should be able to connect to this. Okay, let's just give this a couple seconds more. So it's up and running. Let me just pull back my browser. Okay, so I've logged in back here. To start working with this, let's go and make sure that we have our disk shown up in here. So we'll go to volumes. Okay. First thing we'll need to do is create a new physical volume. We cannot work with anything except before we configure this. So this is our 3 VMDK that we have here. We have our 16 gigs that we have our OS installed on. And then we have the 120 gig for iSCSI target, and then we have 80 for NFS setup. Alright, so I'll go ahead and select my 120 gig drive here, and then I'll create a new partition in this drive. Okay, so just go ahead and create here at the bottom. Okay, so now we have a partition created in our 120 gig VMDK. We'll next need to go to our volume group. Our volume group's over on the right here, and then add this partition into that volume group. Okay, so volume group, let's create a volume group. Let's just call this group 1. Alright, and now I'm going to go ahead and add that 120, well, it's formatted to 114 here. Okay, so I have my volume group created with this volume, or this partition. Next, I'll just need to go to add volume here. I'll select our default group 1 that we need to create a volume in. Okay, and then give this volume a name. Let's just call this volume 1. So this is volume 1 in our volume group 1. Alright, so the space for this, let's just use the maximum space that we have available to us. And then I would go ahead here under file system and select block, or this is for block-based storage, because this is the disk we'll configure iSCSI target on. And then next I'll just hit create at the bottom here. Okay, so now we have our volume 1 created, and it's for iSCSI target. All right. Next, I'll go to iSCSI target here and set this up. So we have our iSCSI target here. We just hit on add. Okay. So once this is created, we'll map a LUN over to this target. All right. So let's just go over to LUN mapping, and then we want to map our volume 1 that we just created. We want to map that over to this LUN. So I'll leave the defaults here for the read-write mode. Leave the transfer mode default here too, and then just hit on map here. Alright, so that's basically it for mapping. What we'll need to do here, too is add a network rule that would allow our ESXi host to access this this OpenFiler box. So to do that, let's just go back and create a rule. Okay, we'll create a rule and then we'll come back to our iSCSI target. So let's just create a rule here, and let's just call this ESXi. So this would be for ESXi coming into this OpenFiler box. We'll add the network here and then the mask that our ESXi would be coming in from there. Okay, so I have a class C here, and this is my network setup, and I'll just update this. We could add multiple rules. If we need to delete this, just hit on delete here. Okay, so let's just go back now to our volumes where we were working on iSCSI target. Alright, so recall we went to target configuration just now, then we went to LUN mapping and we mapped that over there, and then the next tab here is our network access control list. This is the rule that we just created for ESXi. Okay, and I just need to configure or change this to allow. By default it will be denied, and that's about it. So now we have a fully functional iSCSI target set up here. We'll go into the configuration of our data store and setting up our host to point to this target. We'll do that in a little bit, but for now, what I want to do is demonstrate the NFS configuration and finish off with this here. So then we could move on to our data store slides and then configuration of our data stores too. Alright. So what we could do here also is set up our chat authentication. But ideally you would want to make sure your initiators are connecting to this iSCSI target before you bring in or introduce any sort of authentication. So once that's up and running, then you'll come and configure your authentication. Alright. So let me just get into the NFS configuration really fast. Let's go back to our volume group, and we'll create a new group now. So this was group 1 for iSCSI. So we'll basically create a new group for NFS. So let's just call that one group 2. So this is on our 8 gig VMDK. So I'll select that and then create a new group here. I'll just hit create here. So once I have that physical volume up, I'll go to my volume group here and just I'll just create a new volume group to map to that 8 gigs. So let's just call this one group 2. Okay, and then I'll just map this over, add this volume over to that group 2. Okay, so now we have our group 1 with our 120 gig, and then we have our group 2 with our 80. This is configured for iSCSI, and we'll configure this now for NFS. So we'll need to add the volume here for group 2, so I'll just go to add volume now, and rather than working with group 1, we're now working with group 2. Okay, and then I'll just hit change there. So for group 2, let's just call this volume 1 too. So this is volume 1 in group 2. Okay, let's call this volume 1. We could give it a description. So I want to use the maximum space on this. And then the file system, we could choose a file system. For iSCSI, we chose block storage or block file system. For this, we'll leave the default as XFS. This doesn't really matter here because we'll be accessing this over the network too. So leave the default there and hit on create. Okay, so just one more step and then we will have our NFS server up and running. I'll need to come to shares now. Okay, so on the share, we have volume 1 here under group 2. I'll just select that, and I need to create a subfolder here. So let's just call this NFS. Sorry, NFS, and then we'll create a subfolder here. Okay, so now that we have our NFS folder here, we'll click on that and then make share at the bottom. Okay, we're not entering any other information, just hit make share here. And for this, you could configure your access here. For now, I'll just set this to public guest access. I'll set this to public guest access and then come down here and hit on update. Okay, and here we'll just enable our access for NFS. So if we are just storing ISO images on this data store, this NFS data store, we'll just set read-only access. But we're actually going to store virtual machines, so we want read-write access here. Okay, and this is under NFS. So under NFS, read-write access and update.